We can never give our daughter to a worthless man." The words fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. No shouting, no raised voice, just a calm verdict that rippled through me until I felt it in my fingertips. I sat there in my best suit, back straight, hands clasped to hide the tremor in them. My uncle leaned back in his leather chair, fingers resting against each other, as though he had just balanced an account and found it wanting. My cousin, the woman I had loved quietly and completely for years, sat by the fireplace. She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, and I watched her knuckles whiten as she twisted the fabric of her green dress. The room smelled of pipe smoke and polished wood, the sort of scent that clings to people who have never had to ask for permission. Outside, rain pressed against the drawn curtains, its steady rhythm muffled and far away. Inside, silence pressed harder. I managed a nod, quick, mechanical, as though I'd just agreed to a reasonable point in a polite discussion. I don't remember exactly how I excused myself, only that my legs carried me out the door and into the rain like they belonged to someone else. The car ride home was a blur of wet roads and blurred lights. His voice looped in my head, always in that same even tone. Not angry, not mocking, simply sure, worthless. By the time I reached my mother's small living room, the borrowed jacket felt like it weighed 100 pounds, the tie like a noose. She looked up from the sofa with quiet hope in her eyes, but one look at my face and her expression changed. I didn't say a word. I just removed the jacket, draped it over the chair, and went straight to my room. I lay on the bed fully dressed, watching the shadows of raindrops crawl across the ceiling. The humiliation was raw, almost physical. But beneath it, something else began to take shape. Ape, something colder, more deliberate. It was not rage, not yet. It was the knowledge that I would carry those words like a brand until I burned them away myself. I will never be worthless again. I grew up on a narrow lane where the houses leaned toward each other, as if they were in on some quiet secret. It was the kind of street where everyone knew who owned which bicycle, where the smell of someone else's dinner drifted through your window, and where children's voices bounced between the walls until sunset. She lived just 2 doors down. My cousin, my friend, my first and only love. We were born within months of each other, raised on the same cracked pavements and dusty playgrounds. We flew kites in the summer, shared mango slices sprinkled with salt in the monsoon, and whispered dreams under the single streetlight that flickered at night. In those early years, nothing separated us except the occasional childish argument. But life has a way of drawing invisible lines. My father died when I was 15, and overnight, the boy who used to carry cricket bats and laugh too loudly became the boy who counted coins before buying bread. My mother took up sewing to make ends meet, her hands growing rough from the needlework. Her father, my uncle, was different. His fortunes rose each year. His house, already larger than ours, became a place of marble floors and imported curtains. He bought a black car that seemed to glide silently over the potholes of our street, and when it passed, people turned to look. I noticed the changes most when I visited their home. Where my mother's kitchen smelled of cardamom tea and worn wood, theirs smelled of polish, expensive soap, and something else. The kind of air you only find in houses where nothing is ever left out of place. My uncle's voice carried a weight that made people straighten their backs, even when he wasn't talking to them. We grew older. I began working small jobs after school, stocking shelves, delivering parcels, anything that brought in money. I told myself it was temporary, that once I found my footing, I'd be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the men my uncle respected. But over the years, I began to hear the remarks. Not outright insults, never in front of everyone, but small comments slipped into conversation like a bitter spice in sweet tea. "Ambition is what separates the men from the boys," he'd say, looking straight at me as he sipped his tea. Some people are happy with just enough to survive. Love doesn't fill a home. Money does. I pretended not to notice. I told myself he was simply old-fashioned, that he'd come around once he saw how serious I was about her. She never spoke of it directly, but there were moments, tiny, fleeting moments, when I caught a shadow in her eyes, like the time we were walking home from the market and her father's car slowed beside us. He rolled down the window, looked me over, and told her to hurry inside. She obeyed without looking back. Friends tried to warn me. "He'll never let you marry her," they said. "You don't fit his picture." My mother, too, would hesitate before asking if I was sure. Each time, I answered the same way. Love was enough. I clung to that belief because it was all I had. I thought she saw me, really saw me, not the size of my paycheck or the wear in my shoes. But love, I would learn, doesn't erase the lines that people like my uncle draw. It only makes you blind to them until you run face first into the wall. The town slept under a bruised purple sky, the moon caught behind a veil of slow-moving clouds. I stood outside the old brick office building, its windows dark except for one at the very top. The office that, until 2 months ago, belonged to the man who had laughed at me across a dining table and called me worthless. That word had followed me everywhere, in the saloon when I walked past strangers, in the dust of this street when I saw my reflection in the glass, even in the quiet of my own room when the lamps went out. It was their weapon. But tonight, it was mine. I'd spent years working in silence, years they didn't see. While they thought I was drifting, I was buying debts, collecting notes, and waiting for the right moment to pull the thread that would unravel their empire. The door gave a low groan as I pushed it open. My boots echoed in the hallway, a sound I didn't try to hide. I wanted him to hear me coming. In the top-floor office, my cousin's father, the man who had once refused my proposal, whose voice had carried the sentence, "We can never give our daughter to a worthless man," looked up from a desk cluttered with papers. He tried to hide the worry in his eyes when he saw me. He knew. Somewhere deep down, he knew the ground under his feet was already gone. I laid the deed on his desk, my name in black ink stamped across the header. His company, the business he had built, the pride of his life, was mine now. "Worthless," I said softly, "was the only thing you ever gave me. I just learned how to spend it better than you." His face fell in the lamplight, and in that moment, worthless stopped being an insult. It became the blade I had sharpened for years, and tonight I had finally cut him down with it. By the time the winter sun spilled over the horizon that morning, the town already knew. Not the details, those I kept close to my chest like the last cartridge in a six-shooter, but enough for the whispers to spread like dry grass fire. The worthless man had bought the very company that fed half the town. I was sitting on the porch, coffee steaming in my hands, when I saw them coming. 3 figures, one in a pressed waistcoat, one in a hat too fine for dusty boots, and one, him, my uncle, the man who once looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't worth these, dirt under his shoes. Their shadows stretched long over the frosted road. They didn't walk like men. They walked like men who had to. The first to speak was my uncle. His voice cracked, but he tried to hide it under a smile that felt carved from stone. "Son," he began, like the word might undo the years of silence between us. "We've been thinking, maybe we got off on the wrong foot back then." I let the words hang in the air. The only sound was the slow, deliberate creak of my rocking chair. The man in the waistcoat took his hat off, twisting it in his hands. "We heard there's a new hiring season coming. My daughter, she could use the work. Just a clerk position, nothing fancy. A clerk position. In my office. For their daughter, the same one they once vowed would never be tied to a worthless man." I took a slow sip of coffee. Let the bitterness coat my tongue. Let the silence grow heavy enough to bow their shoulders. "You boys remember," I said finally, my voice low but sharp, "that day on your porch, when you told me what I'd never be?" My uncle's jaw worked, but no sound came out. "Well," I leaned forward, setting the cup down with a soft clink. "Turns out, sometimes a worthless man's worth just enough to decide who eats and who doesn't." They left without a handshake, and I sat there, watching them shrink down the road, their pride trailing behind them like smoke. I stood at the edge of the lawn, looking at them. The same people who had once stood in that doorway, their chins high, their words sharp enough to cut bone. Now their heads hung low, their eyes darting to the gravel, to the hem of their clothes, to anywhere but my face. They didn't say sorry. People like them rarely do. Instead, they said things like, "We were wrong, Beta. We didn't know your worth then. Please, for the sake of family." It was almost laughable. Worth. That word again. My uncle's hands shook as he held the teacup my wife had given him. My aunt kept dabbing at her eyes with the corner of her dupatta, but I could tell there were no tears. Just the act of someone who wanted to appear broken. Behind them, my cousin stood stiff, her face unreadable. The same cousin I had once asked to marry. The same one who had turned away when her father called me worthless. For a long time I said nothing. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was power. The kind of power I had built, brick by brick, deal by deal. While they slept soundly, thinking I'd never rise, I remembered the nights in a rented room with no furniture, eating stale bread while studying the contracts of the company I would one day own. I remembered the first time I signed my name on the acquisition papers, knowing that in that moment every insult had just become a receipt for my patience. Finally, my uncle looked up at me. "So, will you agree?" I could have said yes. I could have taken that victory and wrapped it in ribbons. But victories are sweeter when left unanswered, because an unanswered question gnaws at a man more than a no ever could. I smiled, just enough to be polite, and set my cup down. Then I walked away, past the garden, past the driveway, past the point where their voices could reach me. That was the last time they saw me, and that was the answer I never gave.